welcome to the Malecón, Havana's blustery seafront promenade, where people come to stroll, to fish, and to hang out at the weekend. These vintage cars make the place feel like a historical film set. It's like a trip to another era, the 1940s and 50s, when the island was a bolt hole for many Americans. Hola, ¿qué tal? Vamos.
Our 1964 convertible is a well-preserved example of the creativity and skill of the mechanics who keep these vehicles chugging along. The more eye-catching models are generally rented by the hour to tourists, but many Cubans really do get from A to B in these cars, just as their grandparents did in pre-revolutionary times. One man who would have been behind a wheel like this one was Ernest Hemingway.
We're at Finca Vigía, the villa Ernest Hemingway bought in 1940, and he lived here on and off for 20 years. The man Fidel Castro called his favourite writer was certainly inspired here in Cuba. Hi, Isabel. Thanks for having us. Let's go.
First time Hemingway came to Cuba was just a coincidence. He was coming from Europe to Key West in Florida, and the ship made a stop in Havana for only about 48 hours, but he was in love.
And how do the Cuban people feel about this part of their cultural heritage?
People in Cuba, they love Hemingway. Hemingway was always a bridge between the two countries. Not now that the diplomatic relations are being fixed, you know. For a long time, Americans visit this place. I don't know how they do it, but they did it.
Here in Kohima, Hemingway spent plenty of time on the water. And local legend has it that the main character from his novel, The Old Man and the Sea, was inspired by a fisherman he met right here.
And when he wasn't writing, Hemingway was a fixture in bars like this one, the Floridita, where Papa, as he was known, had his own signature cocktail, the Papa Doble. Heavy on the rum and lighter on the sugar, the drinks now ordered by the hordes of tourists who flocked this watering hole daily. The American author is as notorious for his passions as his writing. Drinking, hunting, travel and bullfighting, they're all woven into a new biopic called Papa.
Somebody very high up has a hard-on for your friend Hemingway. They want him publicly discredited. They want him out of Cuba.
They think you're smuggling weapons.
It's the first Hollywood feature to be filmed on the island since the 1960 trade embargo. A logistical and diplomatic challenge for its director, Bob Yarry. Papa could open doors for other American productions in Cuba. Tinseltown may have been a world away, but homegrown cinema has prevailed, enjoying a golden age in the early years of the revolution. In 1994, Strawberry and Chocolate was the first Cuban film to be nominated for an Oscar.
¿Y qué defiendes tú, chico? Yo defiendo este país. Yo también. Que la gente sepa qué es lo que tiene de bueno. Yo no quiero que vengan los americanos ni nadie a decirnos aquí lo que tenemos que hacer. Está bien. Pero tú no te das cuenta que con toda esa monería que tú haces, nadie te puede tomar en serio. ¿Eh? Tú te has leído todos esos libros, ¿verdad? Pero nada más que piensas en macho. Yo pienso en macho cuando hay que pensar en macho. Como tú en mujeres.
Jorge Perugorría starred as Diego.
Jorge, thanks for bringing me to this amazing place. Can you tell me why it's special for you?
Well, just imagine that more than 20 years ago it was here that we filmed Strawberry and Chocolate. Lots of things are still the same. It hasn't changed. The character Nancy, Diego's friend, lived over there, and Diego lived upstairs. Do you want me to show you?
Okay, perfect. Vamos.
Part of the apartment building has since become a restaurant, La Guarida, and it serves as a beautifully dilapidated shrine to the film.
Ah, this is the film.
Yes, these are stills from the film. The restaurant owner, Enrique, set up the restaurant after we made the film, and he saved a few props. Like this fridge. And a few other things too. That wall is covered with memorabilia from the film. There are those two sculptures as well.
Your film career, let's talk about that. It really took off in 1994 with the film Strawberry and Chocolate. How was Cuban cinema doing at that time?
After the fall of the Berlin Wall, socialism took a real hit. All of Cuba's economic, business and cultural ties were built with Eastern European countries, and everything disappeared overnight. Before the film industry was nationalized, the state practically produced everything. There were 10 or 12 films made each year, and they were funded by the Culture Ministry. When that funding disappeared in 1993, only one film was shot. We went from 12 films a year to one. That one film was Strawberry and Chocolate, a co-production with Spain. From that year onwards, Cuban cinema was kept going through co-productions, mainly with Spanish, Latin American and French partners.
Dios mío, te quemé. ¡Qué vergüenza! Ay, pero ¿cómo me puede pasar eso a mí? Deja ver. Corre, quítate la camisa. Acabado de caer, tiene remedio. Un poquito de agua, un trapito. No, quítate la camisa. Ay, Dios, qué pena. Fue así de pronto, yo no...
That film, Strawberry and Chocolate, it did deal with some slightly controversial themes. You had homosexuality, a young man with perhaps bourgeois tastes who befriends a young revolutionary very committed to communism. How was homosexuality treated in Cuban art at the time?
The film Strawberry and Chocolate was the first film to deal with homosexuality, and that was really important. Although this film isn't only about homosexuality, it also talks about tolerance and respect towards others. Cuba is a country that is culturally macho, and although people who are different and homosexuals are still discriminated against, things are starting to change and evolve, even if we still need to change even more. It's a film that is deeply critical, but also honest and necessary. A lot of people discovered Cuban cinema through Strawberry and Chocolate, but there's always been a place in Cuban cinema for critical thinking. It went through some tough times. There were occasional witch hunts and censorship, but artists never lost their direction. They always tried to make Cuban cinema a reflection of the complex society we lived in.
And in fact, later in your career, you did go to the United States to work with Steven Soderbergh on a film about Che Guevara. How was it to tell a very Cuban story in Hollywood?
Soderbergh is a director shaped by independent film. He's an auteur, an artist, someone who is very sensitive. He approaches cinema from an artist's perspective and not someone in the industry.
And how would that film have been different were it to have been made here in Cuba?
Yes, I think it would have been different. I think the film as it is interesting. But if Soderbergh had made it now, he would be able to film in Cuba because things have changed, and that's important. When he directed it in 2008, the embargo in American politics made it impossible. He even came to Cuba with Benicio del Toro. He tried to make the film, but he couldn't.
At the moment, we're seeing the beginning of a process of normalization of relations between the US and Cuba. How do you see that affecting the Cuban people?
Well, a normalization of relations, as you say, it's a thing of the future. These changes haven't yet come to Cuba. Obama's intentions, the US government's intentions are good, but there are still fundamental things that need to be finalized, like lifting the embargo and other internal Cuban issues, so that these political changes between the two countries can actually be felt by Cubans.
Co-productions kept Cuban cinema going when funds were scarce, and the industry's nurtured its ties with foreign filmmakers. Jorge Perugorría was among the actors in 2014's return to Ithaca, working with French director Laurent Canté. The script was written with Leonardo Padura, one of Cuba's leading authors. Padura's among the rare writers to be celebrated both in and outside of Cuba. The former journalist seems to have struck a delicate balance between personal, independent writing and producing work that has consistently passed the country's censor. We caught up with him at Havana's annual book fair, where one text was making waves. George Orwell's 1984 is being published for the first time in Cuba this year.
The fact that 1984 has never been published commercially in Cuba shows that there were a lot of fears about this book. Now that it's going to be published, I hope that it will be a significant step towards opening people's minds when it comes to controversial novels.
A landmark publishing event in a country that has almost 100% literacy. But Padura says Cuban literature still has some way to go.
At the moment, there are very few Cuban writers known outside of the island. Poetry is a genre that's helping Cuban authors make a name for themselves. But on the world stage, I think novels are most important. And Cuba isn't known internationally for that.
Painting, photography, music, theatre and film, it's all under one roof here at the Fábrica d'Arte. This former cooking oil factory is the place to come for the best in cutting-edge contemporary creation, on show in the kind of post-industrial exhibition space you'd expect to find in London, Paris or New York.
Right now, projects like the Fábrica d'Arte are rare in Cuba, but as the country opens up to the wider world, arts and culture are sure to follow. And it seems like there's a captive audience for it.
I think improved relations between the US and Cuba are good. I'm not that political because I'm a musician, but I still think this rapprochement would be a step forward with the US and also the rest of the world. We're already seeing changes, bit by bit.
I think improved US and Cuban relations will be quite beneficial for many things, for everything to do with communication problems here. And they'll help us a lot with the art scene.
An art scene that right now is on the cusp of significant change as Cuba readies itself for an influx of foreign arrivals. It may be too early to use the word cosmopolitan, but Havana could be facing the kind of transformation that will eventually see the city take its place on the global cultural circuit.